And as always, we're going to be looking for accurate context, good risk management, and always exercising good patience.
Everybody who's traded has gone through periods of time where their strategy hasn't worked.
Where if not a hard stop, you should reevaluate the trades you're in based on time.
That's what we're here for, is to put ourselves in the best success. A trading routine does that, builds that habit, lets you know what to work on, what to reflect on, and what to improve on the next day.
Hello, friends and traders. Welcome to the Limit Up podcast, presented by Top Step, the company formerly known as Top Step Trader. I'm Jack Pelzer, joined today not by Dan, who is out in places unknown, but by John Doherty. John, how's the day treating you so far?
Pretty good, Jack. Thanks for having me. I was just going to ask what's up with Dan. He's been out all week, but
no, I just learned he was going to be out earlier this week, so I assume doing something secretive.
Hopefully fun.
Yeah, hopefully fun. So good for him. Well, I'm glad you joined us today, John, because we're going to talk about the second part of Top Step's Prep Trade Reflect ideology, i.e. trade. This is a part that will certainly interest you if you are a trader, because by definition, to be a trader, you trade. So we'll get into that. But first, I thought we could go through a little bit. We don't have to go through all our markets, but maybe let's touch a little bit on equities, specifically the ES. You were just saying we're getting a little sell-off into the finale here.
Yeah, little break, little spike to end the day. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was going to hand it over to you. So what were you kind of seeing today, JD? We can just give a quick overview.
Oh, there's quite a bit of Fed speak going on this week. I mean, I think the big number out today was the PPI, which came in a little better than expected. Got a little break after that, followed by a rally. Never really got back to settlement from yesterday, still hovering underneath yesterday's close. And then just a bit of a sell-off to end the day here. Right in the middle of the range. Not a whole lot to speak of. Pretty quiet day, actually. If you ask me.
We're in that shortened week. There's not a lot of the big numbers. You mentioned we had PPI. There was a few Fed members that spoke, and there still seems to be this holding the line. The Fed members are not liking to back off. It is a game of sort of economic chicken going on, where despite the data getting better as far as inflation, some other things, the Fed has to do their best to, they call it jawboning. Basically, if they were to give up and be like, yeah, things are looking pretty good, asset prices would go to the moon. So regardless of what they believe, they got to kind of keep the drumbeat going for now. And what do you think for the next meeting? We can get a 0.25% or 0.5%?
I think the consensus was 0.5%, isn't it? I don't think they're going to stray from that.
Even if they wanted to, I think that they're going to not rock the boat and just kind of narrow in on whatever the consensus is. So
yeah. I mean, the numbers out this morning kind of give the impression that these rate hikes are slowly starting to do their job. You might want to say.
Mortgage rates are down. The carry trade is back in Japan. 10 years, 3.3 or something like that. Things are starting to look normal. The difference being that way on the short end of the curve, we still got the 4% plus rates, which is historically quite high. So we'll see how that shorts out. But hopefully, fingers crossed, everyone, on the soft landing. So that's what's going on today. Technically, we had one beautiful day on the ES where we held above the 200-day moving average, and the 50 and 200 are so close to crossing right now that we are back below both of them. So once again, pay attention to those levels. They're going to be sticky. Good place to use your asymmetric risk to either fade it or go for the breakout. Keep your eye on it. And with that, JD, did you have anything else to say there?
Oh, I was just going to say these are great areas for low risk, high reward trade entries also. So,
and we love those as we get in the trade. If you can be right half the time, you got to be taking those rewards for quite a bit further than the risk. And that gets into what we're talking about today. Last week, we talked about trade prep as part of the Prep Trade Reflect. We talked about morning routines, evaluating yourself and your mental clarity, and also the research, the homework you do, everything you do before you actually place a trade for the day. Now, where would you start the trade phase, JD? Do you see the trade beginning as soon as you are done with your research and like open to the idea of taking them, or once you have a trade on?
Once you have a trade on, I mean, obviously, like this is the easy part, right? You know, you did all that work to get ready for the day. Like, well, you would think that this is the easy part, right? But this is the time where, you know, your mental toughness really starts coming into play. So I would say my trading day starts when I sit down and I've done all my prep work. I see I have my temporary bias set up from the prep work that I did. I have an idea of what I want to do for my first trade of the day. I start looking for those opportunities to support my bias, which is kind of the opposite of what you want to do. That first trade is I find that first trade very important. So when you're looking for reasons to support your bias to begin with, if it works out, great. If it doesn't work out, then you set the tone. You know, you have some adjustments to make if you lose after that first trade. But I would say your trading day really starts when you establish that temporary initial bias. You look for those opportunities and you wait for the market to come to you to put on that first trade.
Yeah, we talked a lot last week about looking out to the big picture, especially when you're doing your research, going to the day bars, the week bars, figuring out all the big levels that are around there. And when you know those, then you can start getting more granular. And when you're putting on your trades, that's when I would give the go ahead to start narrowing the time frames on the bars and whatever works for you. I don't, for some people that might be 15 minutes, a half an hour, might be 5 minutes. Then you can start really looking on where you're going to enter this. And once you have your good setup, and remember, as part of this trade thing, you only have to make a couple trades a day. Vastly more people overtrade than undertrade. You are in the distinct minority if your issue is that you are not pulling the trigger on trades. As you get in there, as you finally do it, a whole host of other psychological phenomenons start occurring, right? And the biggest issue that we see here is people get into a trade, they have it framed out, and maybe we start with the things you absolutely need to do, right? You need to have an idea of what you're risking and how much you're going to take that for. JD, before I get into some of this, how do you typically look at that? When you go into a trade, you always start with a stop, right?
Sure. I think it's important to have an idea of knowing where you're going to get out before you get in, you know. Unfortunately, you know, we're not robots. We have to deal with emotions, like you said, things like fear, anger, greed, confidence, overconfidence. These are the things that kind of tear us apart when we're looking for trade entries and exits, you know. Putting on bracket orders, I would say, is initially probably the best thing for a lot of traders, where you could just kind of set it and forget it, not play with it, not playing with your stops, not moving profit targets, not getting too greedy, just kind of slowly easing into it, building up your account. These are all important things. Pardon me. But when those emotions really start taking over, it can change your game, and you've really got to learn to get a grip on that. So I would probably say I don't know, but
No, sorry. I was about to prompt you with it. So what I was going to say, I think everything that you put out there is correct, is the idea of, you know, how you set your stops, because I think you're absolutely right with the bracket orders being a good way to start. But I think what we see is a lot of people who are beginning this, taking a good best practice where they will set their bracket order for something that gives them a 1.5, 2 to 1 or more risk reward, but kind of do that as a one size fits all thing. And what I was asked about where you set your stops is that I think when you're entering a trade, part of your strategy shouldn't just be like I am just always risking 3 ticks to make 6 ticks. I would suggest that maybe there's a little bit, shall we say, less arbitrary criteria for where you set your stop and profit target and something like that. So like when you put on a trade, JD, when you're setting that initial stop, sort of what are you looking for? And kind of the same thing with the profit target.
Sure. It all depends on what type of trade I'm putting on too. You're looking at multiple setups. Well, a trader should have multiple setup in their sort of, I guess, playbook, you could call it. So, I mean, I'll take for an example, say a failed top or a failed bottom trade. If we're trading in a sideways market, you recognize that sort of, midway through the day, we're in a range, we're not breaking out. This might be a good opportunity to put on a low risk trade, fading a new high or fading a new low. Tight stop, probably take a 5-to-1 risk reward out of it, risking 1 or 2 to make, 7 or 8 around that area. So that's just one example. Another one of my favorite setups on a 30-minute chart would be bull and bear flags on slowly trending days. You could always find tight. It's easy to tighten up your risk playing the sort of the far end of those channels. Pardon me. But I'm always looking for a minimum of at least 2-to-1 on my risk reward. Anything I can do to maximize that, I will look into. But like I said, different trades call for different risk parameters. Never risking in a day more than 5% of your account value. I find that's best practice also.
That's a huge part when you're putting on a trade too, is in addition to overtrading, the practice that we probably see, the destructive practice we see most people do is wagering way too much as a percentage of their total risk on a single trade. I mean, generally, the professionals aren't risking more than 1 or 2% on a given trade. And so if you're in something like the trading combine, granted, just by the nature of the size of futures and stuff, you'll have to kind of push that a little bit. But I think we see too many people who have, it's very clear what your risk limits are there, 3,000, 6,000, 9,000, but we see far too many people risking 10, 20, 30, 50% of their account as the risk parameters on a given trade. And that's not giving you enough time for, even if you have a strategy that works, you can get eaten up just by the churn of the probabilities there. You can you should be sizing up as your account gets bigger, and more importantly, proportionally, just use a percent, some percent you're comfortable with that's lower. I think that 5% realm, and use that as what you're risking on your stop for any of these trades. Now, we got a ton of questions. We had Jared Tendler with us yesterday, and so many of the questions we had coming into him were people who were getting bored, anxious, nervous. And the sum total of all of these were that they were cutting winners before they reached their target, or the kiss of death, backing off your stops. I mean, your stop should give you confidence that I'm not going to lose more than this in a trade. If you're going to move that back, that is not something that we would recommend doing. That's where you can really hurt yourself. But as we go into trade management too, and this can go into cutting winners early, you can move your stop forward, whether that's to break even. There's 100 ways to set what we would call a trailing stop. I would encourage you, if you're doing this, to not do it arbitrarily, to have it be part of your strategy. Monitor, we'll get at the end, we'll talk about what you should be recording of trades, and certainly be cognizant and keep track of what happened as you move that stop. But you should be basing it on something like a time frame, or we talk about volatility stops that use some measure of volatility as to where you'll trail that to. And then some people are just, and this is perfectly fine, all or nothing in that, well, I set my stop, I set my profit target. For this strategy, I'm going to keep it clean. It's going to hit one or the other, and I'll keep track of that. Is that something you do, JD? Do you mess around with trailing stops or?
I've never had too much luck with trailing stops. It usually gets me out where at a point where I would like to still be in a trade, you know. At worst, I would say not at worst. At most, I'll move my stop up to a couple ticks above break even. I'm not a huge fan of scratching trades. You know, I do believe in covering costs when you put a trade on. So I always like to take at least a tick or two out of a trade, which I guess is still sort of like scratching. But like you were saying, moving stops around, there's a lot of reasons why people do it. And I think if you're going to do it, it should be based on some technical reason, not an emotion, you know. Greed, for instance, you know, will make you move a profit target and move a stop. If it's going against you and you see a point of invalidation changing possibly, instead of getting out of the trade, you'll just move your stop a little lower, take a little more risk. This isn't the way to do it. Well, in my experience, at least, I found this is an easy way to just lose more money. But like I said, things like fear and greed, they'll tear at you and like not force you, but
Yeah,
they'll make you do things that you really don't want to do, things you know you shouldn't do, but you do them anyway. Forcing trades, chasing the market.
especially for people who are just getting started in this. Just setting the same trade criteria without moving stops will make it much easier to track your success, right? Like if I had something where I was doing the same risk to reward and doing the same trade over and over again, I'd have a real good idea of what my win rate was on that trade and how much I made or lost. Assuming that you had a system that you were moving the trailing stop the same each time, I suppose you could arrive the same thing. But if you want to evaluate that, it better be pretty clear. Like, I'm making this up. I would not recommend doing it, but say, this is really simple, but I'm going for a 3-to-1 risk reward and I move the stop to break even when it crosses 1.5 reward or something like that. If you do that every time, then you will have a similar understanding of what the win rate is for this and how much you're making on average. And from that, if you find that you're getting stopped out too much on trades that would work or stuff, you could move or alter your strategy to take that into account, to give yourself more room or not. So that's something else to definitely pay attention to. What I'm a bigger fan of from my days of trading is scaling in and out of positions. And to be clear, scaling does not mean cannonballing losers. Scaling is not, I plan to make a 1 ES trade and now I have 3 on because it went against me. The idea is how we would trade. We would often, I would tend to divide my size into thirds. And with a level, I would get a third of it more aggressive, whatever that means, a third of it right on the level, and a third of it a little less aggressive. And that way they would average out to be the whole position size I wanted at that original level. The same can be done going up. Like if you want to take if you have a third of your size off at 2-to-1 reward, 3-to-1 reward, 4-to-1 reward, you can play with things like that. Just be consistent with it so you can track the results, which I think is the most important part.
Would you weight each level as far as contract size goes? Like at level 1, you trade 5. At level 2, you trade 3.
So we never traded
Sort of.
outrights. By nature of what we did, we were trading larger hedge positions where you would have to get. It was a little trickier. It was like trying to steer a boat, right? Because you'd have to buy something in one market at the same time you sold it. So to get the whole thing on, realistically, if you had to do, say, 15 units of what we were trading, I would usually, like, sometimes I might change it where I might do more like a 4th aggressive. It depends on how I felt. Like, you can't, sometimes you got to have a feel. We always have to have a feel for what like the market conditions are, how volatile things are, how easy it is to get things on, things like that. Like, scaling gives you the ability, I think, in faster markets to have a wider range where you put things on. But
Mhm.
it's something to try out, especially with the micros and things like that, to see
Yeah.
if it works for you.
I think it's important what you said about scaling is not cannonballing also. This isn't when you're scaling into a buy position, you have that zone. You called it the level. It's more or less a zone,
Yeah.
where you see there is a point of invalidation for that trade, and not to go below that. This isn't the old days, where like, how did it go? If I liked him at 5, I
Mhm.
love him at 4, and if it hits 3,
Yeah.
I'll buy everything you got, That's cannonballing, that's not scaling. So scaling
Yeah.
in is it's just as much of an art form, I think, as the trailing stop is. But you have to know where those levels of validation are and not get married to a position for sure.
And it only works for certain types of trading too. I
Yes.
mean, yeah, like it's kind of like if you're doing the reversal at a 200-day moving average, you're very rarely going to top tick or bottom tick things, but you give yourself like a little bit of a room because these things don't always just turn around on a dime. The
Mhm.
reason we had to do it too, JD, is we'd have to pay attention to the actual futures levels independent of the trades we put on, like butterflies and stuff. They had numbers, but the numbers didn't mean anything besides to us. They were levels only in the sense that they were a measure of where this position we constructed was, if that makes sense. So while we were doing it, you had to pay attention to the actual futures levels for important things that are out there, which brings me back to when we talked about different stops and stuff of you shouldn't do things out of boredom if it's just taking a while to work out, but do be aware of what else is going on in regards to time. I mean, if you're holding on a position that's not going anywhere and the CPI number is coming out or something, then I think it's completely fair game to get flat. But be aware of that before you put on the trade. And where we see this every day is if you're a day trader in something like the combine, don't force trades late in the day when you got to get flat. You don't want to trade on a time limit. And those are just, you're entering into the gambling realm
Mhm.
at that point. If you don't have the ability to hold things overnight, you're at a distinct disadvantage for trades like that. So I would just stick around with that. Make sure it's part of your strategy. Know what times of days to trade.
Yeah, those time frames are important. You have to keep yourself grounded and be realistic about your expectations there. If you're trading off a 5 or a 15-minute chart, the odds of you hitting a 100-point dinger are pretty slim.
Yeah.
So keep an eye on that clock. If you're looking at a 15-minute chart and you've been on a trade for more than a half hour and it's not going anywhere, you might want to look a little harder at what's actually going on.
That's a good point. And then finally, I think the last part about your trade that kind of goes into what we're going to talk about next week with reflection, but we'll give a little preview of it now. You need to know what to track on your trades. And we talk a lot about journaling, and there's a lot of good software out there, or you can design your own spreadsheet or anything else. But I'll let you go first, JD, and kind of, so you close out a trade. What are a few things that you are looking at as far as how it panned out and what you would want to take note of?
Most importantly, did I stick to my trading plan? Did I put my stop in and my profit target? Did I stay true to those? Did I move anything around? Basically, like I said, did I stick to my trading plan? Did I adapt to the market environment? Did I see something happening in the market and change my position? If I did, was it worth it? Did it work out? Did it not? Should I have stuck with my trading plan? What was your emotional response to putting on this trade? Were you very nervous when you put the trade on? Were you excited? Were you super confident? Were you sort of standoffish? Were you chasing the market when you put it on? These are all things I like to track. Basically your mental state when you put that trade on, the result of the trade, how you handled yourself while the trade was on. I think those are all important things to take a look at. And it'll help you later on when you're going through your journal at the end of the day, end of the week, end of the month, seeing how you progress through the learning process of learning what your emotions are and how you're actually dealing with them in a live market environment.
I think too that if you did bail on the trade for whatever reason, be it things weren't feeling right, you moved your stop, anything else, is to take note of what the result would have been had you not done that. Just that's a good assessment. So then you at least have an assessment of what the validity is of the trading system you were using. And be careful if you're, once again, I feel like I'm always coming for the scalpers or something like that, but be careful with your assessment of how a trade might have worked out. Make sure it trades like a full level or something if you're going to keep track of that.
Yeah. And like I said, we are not robots. You're going to get that urge to tinker with your trade when it's on. It's going to happen. You're going to do it. But make a note of when you do. Be honest about why you did it and what the result was. You might learn something from it.
So much tinkering. I can just think of tons of times where I knew that I should get out of something. I like thought it the whole time and then just didn't do it. Getting on that, that hopium or whatever they call it. Copium, whatever it is. So keep track of those thoughts. Like maybe your instincts are right more than you think, but then it's important to put them into the strategy, not just, you can't trade completely on feels out there. That's a recipe for bad things to happen. Well, I think that about sums up our trade, part of the prep trade reflect today. We'll be back next week to talk more about reflection on trading, reflection in life. It's an important thing. Figure out what you're doing, mental clarity, things like that. JD, you feeling any mental clarity lately?
A little bit here and there.
Yeah, just here and there. I'm chasing that nirvana. Well, JD, thank you for stepping in today. We'll track down Dan in like the wilderness on his snowmobile or whatever he's doing right now.
Is there any snow anywhere? I don't know.
That's a good point. It's just, man, it's like a creepy Halloween type vibe in here. It's just been raining all the last 2 days.
It's almost 50 degrees in Chicago right now.
I know. We're through. This is supposed to be the coldest week of the year, like this next week. So if we can get through this, I'm looking forward to it. So, all right. Well, I'll see you in person soon, JD. And
thanks again for having me. I always enjoy being here. Thank you.
Thank you for stepping in. And thank you for listening to Limit Up. We do this on Thursdays live. Morning, we got the morning forecast with Hogue. Check that out on the YouTube channel. If you're interested in trading psychology, really check out the Jared Tendler interview. We posted it on our YouTube channel today. He answered questions like a madman for about an hour. I was impressed by the velocity there. So, anyway, get your mind right. Focus on your strategy when you're in the trade phase, right? And just do things that help kind of settle your mind and just trust the process, as they would say. So keep doing that. We'll see you next week. Namaste and trade well.